Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. As we kind of come to the close of the 2025 gardening season, at least here in Connecticut, I thought it would be a good time to just take a little time to reflect back on this past garden season. And it was an interesting one for sure. So I wanted to kind of recap the season for you. And kind of going along with that, a lot of the recaps that we're going to talk about are going to be sparking some changes in the garden next year. I actually have some pretty big changes coming. I haven't exactly fleshed out exactly what that's going to look like yet, but I am playing around with some ideas, so I wanted to fill you guys in on my process a little bit. So first, let's talk about this 2025 garden season. Now, the garden season isn't completely done, but at least for me, it is really winding down. And we can definitely reflect back, and it was an interesting one, as I said. So each garden season, I find that it's different. You know, every year is different. There's different weather, there's different challenges, there's just different things going on in the environment, and honestly, different things going on in my life too. And that kind of thing impacts the amount of time and energy that I have to devote to the garden. So all of that kind of adds up to, you know, every garden year is unpredictable, definitely keeps things interesting. So this year, as with most years, we had some plants, some categories of plants that did better than usual, some that did worse than usual, some that did quite badly, in fact, some that were pretty much average. So I'll just run through those quick, and then I'm going to address some of the specific issues we had this year and talk about how I am planning to tackle those things a little bit differently in the garden next year. So first of all, I'll talk about things that were average in the garden. You know, cucumbers were pretty average. They did about what I expected to do. Not amazing, not, you know, we got enough. So I was satisfied with cucumbers. You know, lettuce. So when I say lettuce did average, lettuce always does well. I don't think I've ever had lettuce do poorly for me. You know, at certain points in the season, it may do poorly, but overall throughout the season, lettuce is a very easy, dependable crop to grow, at least in my experience. So an average year for lettuce is still a really good year that I'm happy with. So lettuce did about what I expected, really well. Beans, you know, that's another one. Green beans, you know, I say green beans, but I grow purple beans, yellow beans, all the colors of beans. Beans did about as I expected as well, which similarly to lettuce, beans are very dependable for me. So an average bean year is a good year. So I was happy with that. I will say, surprisingly, peppers actually did average. It was, when we talk about challenges, we'll talk about tomatoes for sure. Tomatoes and peppers they're not exactly the same, but they have some similarities in growing conditions that they prefer. So I was actually very surprised with how much my tomatoes struggled this year that my peppers actually did about, you know, they did about what you would expect. So peppers did well. I was happy with peppers. Now, some things actually did better than average. You know, strawberries did really well for us this year. I think, honestly, that is probably just because our strawberry patch is getting more established. I think this is the third year with the strawberry patch. And I think just because it's getting more established, strawberries did really well. It was the best strawberry year we've had. Now, I have in the past, this specific strawberry patch, it's the third year. I have grown strawberries with varying degrees of success in the past, but this was the best strawberry year that we've had. So I was happy with that. Also, I will say, we had a long, cool spring. The beginning of summer was cool too. That's the reason for some of my other crops struggling, but it did have the effect of giving me a better than average brassica year. So my spring broccoli, especially sprouting broccoli, did really well. We had some good cabbage. We had a lot of kale, although kale always seems to do pretty well. So those brassica plants, I'd say especially the broccoli, did better than average, and I was really happy with that. Of course, you know, it's kind of a trade-off because that same weather that caused the brassica plants to do well really caused my tomatoes to suffer, but I'm jumping ahead of myself. We'll get to tomatoes in a minute. So zucchini actually did really well this year. Zucchini, of course, is a reliable plant and generally does well. This year, it did better than average. I have lots of zucchini in my freezer, both shredded zucchini waiting to be baked up, and I have some diced zucchini ready for lots of warming winter soups. So zucchini did really well, and I actually still have zucchini yielding out in my garden, so we'll continue to increase our supply of zucchini. So let's get into the things that did not do so well this year. And when I talk about these, most of them I'm at least starting to form a plan for how I'm going to deal with this and hopefully get better results next year. So the first thing I want to talk about is peas. Now, peas did not do that well for me this year, and it was really a germination issue. Now, I planted my peas at the same time that I normally do most years, and I think this may have been a weather issue, which there really isn't anything I can do about that, unfortunately. But what I would like to be more proactive about is checking on my peas for early germination and resowing seeds. You know, if you saw my last video, it was a little mini seed haul, and I got a nice big bulk pack of snap pea seeds, and I wanted to get extra so that if I have poor germination again, I can go out and resow those seeds as soon as possible. One thing that peas like cool weather, and peas tend to take a long time to germinate in cool weather. But when the weather is too cool combined with excessive moisture, sometimes the peas will just take too long to germinate and then they'll end up rotting, which I think that is partly what happened. And I think also I had some animals that were snacking on my seeds or snacking on the sprouts as soon as they sprouted. I will have to think a little bit more about a solution to the animal problem, and I will let you know if I come up with anything for that. But as far as the germination problem, I'm just going to have to be more vigilant and make sure to resow seeds if I can, or if I need to. Next, I want to mention garlic. Now, garlic did not do well this year. The plants were healthy, and all of my garlic plants did yield a bulb. We got garlic scapes, those did really well. Those did about what I expected. We enjoyed the garlic scapes. But the bulbs themselves ended up being really small, much smaller than usual. So I bought my seed garlic, long before I had my YouTube channel, several years before I had the YouTube channel. And every year I have just saved the best garlic heads, the best garlic cloves from my garden to basically to replant that fall to be the following year's garlic crop. This is going to be the first year since I bought garlic seed that I am not going to do that. My garlic came out very small this year. I'm not really sure exactly why. It could have been a weather issue, similarly to what I mentioned about the long, cool spring. I don't know if that really has an effect on garlic as much or not. One thing that I do think is an issue is I moved my garlic to a different part of the garden, and I don't think it really got enough sun there. My yard is a little bit challenging. I don't have anywhere in my yard, aside from the middle of my lawn right in front of my front door, that is truly full sun. So basically my garden is kind of pieced together in places where, it gets as close to full sun as possible. But true full sun, I don't really have that except for one really inconvenient place where I'm obviously not going to put my vegetable garden. So full sun is defined as, I think, 6 hours of sun a day on, just on that full sun on that spot. And I have places in my garden where it gets right about 6 hours of sun a day, but not really as much. And that's only in certain parts of the garden. So my yard's a little bit challenging. I live in the woods. As you can see, I'm surrounded by trees. So I am going to move my garlic to a spot that is a little bit sunnier, and I may put something that can tolerate a little more shade, like lettuce or something like that, in the garlic spot. Additionally, my husband has been working gradually on taking down a few of these trees here, and we have lots of woods around our yard, and opening up a little bit more of our yard to be usable land, I think that would have a beneficial impact on my garden as a whole. So that's more of a long-term plan. So we'll see how that goes. But so for this year, I'm moving my garlic to a new spot, and I did order new seed garlic for the first time since I started growing garlic. So, it's a little bit of a negative because, I had to spend more money on it. But, there is the silver lining of I got to try some new varieties. So I purchased some of the same variety that has been really reliable for me every year, and I grabbed a couple new varieties as well. So I'm excited to give that a try. Now, another plant that was struggled a lot for me this year was tomatoes. And this is a hard one for me because tomatoes are by far my favorite thing that I grow in the vegetable garden. I love fresh garden tomatoes. Now, we did still get a respectable crop of tomatoes. We still got lots of cherry tomatoes for salads and snacking. We got enough slicer tomatoes to eat fresh, and I made a few batches of salsa and things like that. But I did not have enough tomatoes to preserve, which I normally like to do. And based on the number of tomato plants that I'm growing, I should have enough to preserve. So really the only reason we had enough tomato plants for fresh eating and just to make a little bit of extra tomato products was because I have so many plants. So this is a challenging one because this year with tomatoes, it was a combination of several factors that I think caused them to do so poorly. I have already kind of talked about the long, cool spring, the really cool start to summer that we had. That is not a great recipe for tomato success because tomatoes like sunshine, tomatoes like warmth, and they didn't really have much of that in the beginning. Kind of combined with that, I do have tomato disease in my area. It's pretty prevalent. And some years my tomatoes are able to mostly fight it off and still they'll have a little bit of disease, but they'll still be able to kind of chug along and yield for me respectably. I found that was not really the case this year. So I think the combination of the really cool wet spring, the cool wet, the beginning of summer, that just allowed the tomato disease to really take hold because the plants were already struggling. And that is something that I'm definitely going to have to address for next year. Now, I have no way of knowing what the weather's going to be like next year. What I am planning to do is I'm going to cut down the amount of tomatoes that I'm growing next year, which is hard for me to say and hard for me to do. I'm going to focus primarily on growing tomatoes in pots and let the ground kind of rest from growing tomatoes. I do have one bed in my main garden where I haven't grown tomatoes in many years, and I may throw some tomatoes in that bed. But for the most part, I'm going to be focusing on growing tomatoes in pots. I haven't figured out exactly what that's going to look like yet. I'm going to do that for at least a year. I may do that for a couple years, depending on the results that I'm seeing. So I'm also thinking of experimenting a little bit with some cover crops. I have been reading about mustard as a fumigation cover crop, which is supposed to basically purify the soil from certain diseases. I don't know how foolproof that is. It's an interesting concept and something that I will be looking into a little more in the spring, and I may end up giving that a try. I don't know a lot about that, so if you have any experience with that, definitely leave your experience in the comments because I would really like to hear from you. I will say this year, I actually did treat some of my tomato plants with a copper fungicide, which is not something, I never do that. Like, I like to avoid spraying as much as possible, even products that are organic, I like to avoid spraying them. And this year, it was bad enough that I actually did do that, and I don't like doing that. I don't want to do that again. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens next year. I'll fill you in on that plan as it gets more detailed and I figure out exactly what I'm going to do. That's my plan at the moment. One other plant that did not do that well, which I've talked at length about this in previous videos, is my asparagus. So my asparagus, basically, there's multiple issues there. The most pressing one is that it really got overrun with, various types of weeds, including my raspberry bushes, traveled underground and uphill several feet and just popped up in the middle of my asparagus bed. Raspberries are like that. So my plan for that, which I have kind of alluded to in the past, is I'm going to wait. My asparagus is still green right now. I'm going to wait probably in a month or so, it'll go dormant. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig out the asparagus crowns. I'm going to cover that whole area with landscape fabric, and then I'm going to place raised beds on top of the landscape fabric. I'm getting deeper raised beds. Most of the raised beds that you see behind me in my garden are 1 foot deep. I think I'm going to do 1.5 feet for the asparagus. Since it's going to have landscape fabric at the base of the bed, those roots are not going to have access to the soil underneath. So because of that, I'm going to try to get some deeper beds and then replant the asparagus in those beds. So that's my plan for sometime probably in October, November, whenever the asparagus goes dormant. That's my plan. So we'll see how that works. That hope is that the landscape fabric, I'll have to get some heavy duty landscape fabric, and the hope is that that will keep out the raspberries and any other weeds and give the asparagus a little more of a fighting chance to flourish. So I will keep you updated on that. So those are the big changes I'm planning to make in the garden. Kind of going along with that, I did mention that I am not going to be growing that many tomatoes in the ground. Now, if you watched any of my garden tours this year, you know that I have a significant portion of my garden dedicated to tomatoes. So that means that I'm going to have some space to fill, which is an interesting problem. Not my least favorite kind of problem to have. I don't mind having space to fill and experimenting growing new things. So one thing I'm thinking about expanding is the number of pumpkins that I grow, because I have a fairly small garden. I don't grow that many pumpkins because they are plants that tend to take up a lot of space. If I have a lot more space available, I may fill some of that space with pumpkins, so that might be something I will try experimenting with. I was also thinking of growing more flowers and having actual cutting flowers. I always have this plan of growing flowers in my garden, and then I'm going to cut them and bring them inside for bouquets. But what I find is that I really just like having the flowers in the garden. So if I have more, the idea is that maybe I will be able to bring some inside for cutting. Beyond that, I'm not really sure, because I already grow a lot of what I love. So we'll see. I briefly considered potatoes before remembering potatoes are in the tomato family. If my goal is to eliminate disease from the bed, I don't want to be planting something else in the same family. One other thing that I am probably going to grow is milky oats. Now, this kind of jumps more into the topic of herbal medicine, but oats are something that they can have a great benefit. They can be very nourishing for the nervous system, but in order to get that full benefit, you have to harvest them at just the right stage when they have this white milk. And you can only get those if you grow them yourself or if you buy them locally, because once they're dried, they don't have those same benefits. So I have grown those in the past, years ago before my YouTube channel, and I was really happy with those. I made, you blend them up while they're fresh with alcohol to make a tincture, and that basically preserves their properties. So that is something that I will probably grow again next year with my extra space. So go ahead and leave any suggestions you have for things that you think I should look into growing. Also, if you have any suggestions for natural and organic ways to basically purify my soil of this tomato disease. I think it's early blight, and there probably are some other ones mixed in there as well. So if you have any suggestions for that, I would love to hear that as well. So that is my quick summary of the 2025 gardening season, warts and all. It was a mixed bag. We had some great success and some pretty significant failures as well. So I am looking forward to a period of relaxation, and then I'm looking forward to starting up with the 2026 garden. So I hope you're all having a great day. I would love to hear how your 2025 garden did in the comments. What were your best successes and what was a little more of a struggle this year? And also, how do you plan to fix whatever didn't go well? So I hope you're having a great day. I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.